Thank you. Thank you. Before I start, I find myself in need to acknowledge the Tanana Athabascan people, who are the traditional caretakers of this land that we're having these talks on. They've benefited my life greatly with their stories. I have learned from them, and I hope and pray that these stories will continue to be circulated so that we can all learn from them. I love stories. I love books, as you can probably tell. And when I was a kid, I loved stories known as Choose Your Own Adventure books. You probably know some of these books. For instance, you might encounter a dragon. Go to page 36 to slay the dragon. Go to page 42 to befriend the dragon. Take him home to your parents and turn him into your pet. A couple of people that taught me about stories are my mom, Dorothy, and my friend, Ken Potter. My mom, she recently retired after several years of owning a bridal and tuxedo shop. She was always teaching me things. First of all, she taught me about books. She was always open to me reading books, no matter what time of night it was. And whenever I had a question about what a word meant or how it was spelled, she directed me to the family dictionary, which torturous practice I've continued on as a parent to my own kids. She also taught that people live stories. She taught me that we can be there for other people, that we can treat other people right. And she did this through her examples. For instance, somebody might call at the last minute, just before a wedding started, and that they needed some last-minute alterations done, and she'd run to the church and she'd do it right there. Or she might have an employee that was going through some personal suffering, and she would take her off to the side, no matter how busy she was, and she would relate to that person not as an employer to an employee, but as one human being to the other. That's how I recognize my friend Ken Potter, who is a narrative therapist, and the type of narrative practice that he put into his life, even outside of being a therapist. Narrative practice is a way of relating to other people that notices that we are in relationship to one another and to particular stories that we might live. Ken and many of the other narrative practitioners that I've run into, they are the most present and acknowledging people that I've ever known. And I knew that when I came in contact with him and these other people, my heart told me this is the calling that I had. It told me that this was the type of marriage and family therapy I wanted to do with people. But this isn't a talk about narrative therapy. This is a TED Talk about narrative practice. Let me tell you a story that illustrates this. So a church leader of mine, Dieter F. Uchtdorf, talked about one time that he and some other people were trying to move a grand piano from one side of a building to another. No matter how they tried situating themselves, they couldn't get this thing to move until one man said, "Brethren, why don't we space ourselves evenly about the piano and lift where we stand?" This is about lifting where we stand using narrative practice in a way that builds our capacities as a community. This is what I've come to appreciate. Let me talk a little bit about when I first walked into appreciation. I was at a workshop in Vancouver, British Columbia several years ago, listening to one of my favorite narrative practitioners, David Epstein. And what he said there changed the way that I practice, not just as a therapist, but in all aspects of my life. He said, to appreciate someone and have them appreciate themselves in a situation where they might expect to be degraded is beyond my belief. Now, as a very positive person, I would usually go to the appreciation first, but I want to talk to you a little bit about stories of degradation first. Imagine, if you will, looking at this slide here, All these different X's are different events that might occur in somebody's life. Let's imagine a young man who's had the story told about him that he gets poor grades. He actually does get some really poor grades in school. He often gets into fights at school with other kids. He seems to have no friends. People start circulating this story that it must be due to bad parenting, and they start to project this future for him that he's going to end up in prison. And then they string this all together as one story about who this young man is. And this story might have to do with him being a troubled kid. That might be the title of this story. These degraded stories, impoverished stories, or as TED speaker Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie calls them, single storying, isolates a person's identity to the most problematic events in their lives. It degrades them, and it edits out any other possibilities, like these others here, that might have to do with other possibilities that they have. There are, however, other ways that we can look at our life and the lives of those that we relate to, which socio-narratologist Arthur Frank calls generous stories. This might have to do with a little bit more of the appreciation that I talked about. Appreciative stories can look at least two different things, I found. The first level of appreciation is realizing that there's these other stories that we've already talked about, these other events in people's lives. Imagine this same young man, that he has maybe the second part of this appreciation. He has some particular skills. For instance, he loves art and history and does really well with it. He actually gets some really great grades. He stands up for his single mom, which incidentally is the reason why he gets into so many fights at school. He has a small circle of true friends. His mom supports his art, and they love to sing oldies together. The future that this young man and his mom and others that might support him might call this a future so bright as they look into the future for him. This also, as I said, can get put into a story, but it also recognizes all of the other possible stories that might occur that this young man might walk into, whether they're seen or unseen, whether they're real or imaginary. The sort of story that this young man and his supporters might cast for him is no obstacles in my way because of all of these possible stories that he might live into. It's very hard to recognize these type of stories unless you have people in your life to help you recognize them. One way that I often illustrate this is through the different clubs that we might have in our life. Imagine like all of the people that you know in your life, good, bad, and indifferent. You might have those as memberships of a club of life, if you think of it. These clubs of life have several membership tiers, and the one that I want to focus on is, it might be called a platinum membership. This would be the MVPs in your life. If you think about these people, there's very, very few of these people. Maybe only one or two is what I've run into, most people have. And these are the people that'll put down everything that they have, or they'll set up a time for you to be able to talk. And they will hear your entire story. They'll appreciate it. They'll appreciate all the possible castings for you as a person, and they'll vie for your moral character. And then if you need some advice, notice I didn't say want some advice, but you need some advice. If they need to, they can rip you up one side and down the other, and you won't take it badly because you know that that person loves and cares about you. Okay? So the story that I'd really like to tell that's probably one of the closest ones to my heart is of a friend of mine several years ago. at the wrap-up of that part of our relationship, I started kind of questioning her about her experience of treatment, and she said, and she was 16 at the time, that of her 16 years, she had spent 9 years in some sort of treatment, either residential or outpatient, like what I was doing with her. And I was really kind of amazed at how it was that she survived this. And like, how did you survive 9 years of your short 16 years in treatment? And her answer didn't surprise me at all. It was actually sort of mirthful. and she said it was by keeping my head held high and my middle finger higher. and I loved that and wasn't offended at that at all, but I was really drawn into that, and I said, well, I've got to get some little stories about that. Could you tell me a little bit about that? So as she told her stories and we explored it, we found that when she kept her middle finger higher, she found that she was alienating some people that she really needed or cared about in her life, that she was getting in trouble at school and at work, and that she really wasn't going down the path that she had originally intended to. So we kind of said, well, what if we put that on the, if we did the flip on that, and you kept your head held higher? And we started locating together some of these events that she had not previously noticed, where she was keeping her head held higher, but she didn't get rid of the finger. So she said, okay, we'll flip that. We'll call that keeping my middle finger high and my head held higher. And we both thought that was great. And with her permission, I took it to a friend of mine. And this friend said, well, that sounds like some sort of dignified defiance to me. And so I took that back to her, and she said, yeah, I like that. You can use that because there's going to be people that are offended by the middle finger, so you can go ahead and use dignified defiance. Okay? So I started thinking about, these conversations I was having with folks, and I thought, I wear a lot of hats, and a lot of people wear different types of hats, and why do I have to privatize narrative practice to just being a therapist? And so what I first started doing is that the thing that was closest to my heart as far as the hats that I wear is being a dad and being a family man. And what I started doing, I bought a big stack of notebooks like I might for my clients. And I started scheduling interviews with my kids once a month, where I would sit down and I'd interview them like I would one of the folks that comes to consult me. And I found as I did that, I came to hear some stories I had never heard before, and started seeing a part of them that I had never seen before in my relationship to them. I started looking into other parts of my life, other hats that I wear, like my church callings, my co-workership, looking at myself even as a customer at the grocery store, and thinking about, how can I do this more in my life. I also started getting some stories from other folks, how they were noticing it too. Like one friend of mine, she ended up going to a Mexican restaurant, and the family member that she was with just treated the customer service person horribly. And she decided from that point on that she was going to be a good customer, because, as she said it, you'll never know how you're going to impact somebody. I had a similar one like that, where I was having a really bad day. I was tired. I was driving out from, I guess most people know where Delta Junction is, and I was out in Delta Junction. I just wanted to get home. I wanted to get something in my belly. I took the lazy route, and I went to a Mexican restaurant, which will not be named. And as I came to this restaurant and I came up to the box to order, the voice that came over it said, "Have a Tacorific Tuesday." And it was so, they were so enthused and so genuine about it. I'm like, I don't know what a Tacorific Tuesday is, but I'm going to have a Tacorific Tuesday. I was just so excited about having a Tacorific Tuesday, and my life changed because of this Tacorific Tuesday that I was wished, And it was so exciting to me, and I started trying to figuring out, okay, well, what are some ways that other people are doing this in their life? So I kind of did a little survey, and I categorized the hats that we wear into job, career, and calling. And I'm going to tell you 3 stories about that. So I don't know how to put up crown molding. I'm just not talented in that way. As you might see with this corner right here, I did not make that crack in the wall. I didn't do that. But there's this big cleft right there you might see, and I'll figure out that sometime. But that's my work. But I knew somebody that knew how to do this type of work, and I brought him in, and he hadn't done it for a while. So he's doing this first joint right here, and so as he's doing this, I'm noticing him getting really frustrated, but I'm even more interested that he's not getting more frustrated, because I would have. And I mentioned this to him. I said, man, I'd probably be saying some choice words to that joint right there. Why aren't you? And he said, well, it's in part the company that I am. It's really helping you being here. It's like, well, I'm sure that there's more to the story than that. It's like, well, who is it that taught you to do this type of craft, and who is it that kind of taught you not to get more irritated than this? And he says, well, I'll tell you who didn't teach me how to do it is my dad. My dad taught me how to do the work, but whenever he got frustrated with something like this, he'd just smash through the thing. But my grandpa, if he started noticing that something wasn't working like this, he'd get very thoughtful, and he'd get very patient with it. And so as he's telling me this story, he makes the cuts, the initial cut, but then he pulls out his knife, and he just starts whittling away at the back of it. And I was incredibly touched that he was able to put away this modern piece of machinery after he made the cut. And he was able to draw out this ancient piece of machinery and use this craft. And when he was done, he had put together these beautiful joints that I've never been able to do. But I was just really touched by that. And we talked about it afterwards, and he said he never would have been able to do that if he hadn't remembered his dad and his grandpa and decided that he didn't want to smash through this or any other of his crafts, but that he wanted to be very patient and thoughtful. I have a doctor friend of mine that she started to step up to narrative practice in her medical practice. And one day she was at her clinic, and a woman came in that all the doctors referred to as that patient. And she, as soon as everybody started to kind of back away and it started to fight amongst themselves as to who was going to take this lady as a patient, she raised her hand and said, I'll do it, I'll do it. And as she walked back to the examination room with this woman, she had in her heart that she was going to be as one human being to another, and that she was going to hear this woman's stories. And that's what she did in the examination room. She still did her doctoring, but she decided that she was going to be more of a human with this woman than having a doctor to patient type of relationship. In my last category, that of calling, which some people have called, when I looked at the survey, they called it a burning in the bones, or referred to it as outstretched hands that they had felt through job and career. I had to talk about my mom and dad. My mom and dad, even though they got divorced when I was maybe just a little bit older than in this picture, they raised a man apart that got me to feel like I was worth being parented. My mom, as I've already mentioned, she was a person that taught me to treat people right, no matter what the agreeance or disagreeance was. My dad, though he was born with a degenerative eye disease and was blind by the time I remember him, and had a healthy dose of defiance, which, by the way, he passed down to his children. He ended up taking that, maybe in his mid-20s, to become an activist in behalf of blind rights through the National Federation of the Blind. And he was also really well known as very good at teaching people cane travel. They raised this man that was able to take all of the gifts that they were given and able to hear a little bit about the possibleness that's available in life as far as the type of identities that I might have, and help me to be able to advocate for other people by, with them, spitting in the eye of some societal norms that we have that degrade people. It's my hope and prayer that all of us will be able to appreciate ourselves and our relationships and the values we're starting to walk up to, that we'll be able to, in our relationships, ask ourselves, how am I becoming, or how do I become a platinum member in this person's life, or gold or silver or bronze, and be able to recognize the values they're stepping into as well. Thank you.